It is 7:33, and I call to order this meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. Um, for those who are just joining us, we have the Boy Scouts who will be listening to us. So I promise I'll try and behave. Um, the
I want them invited every day, every time.
Notice I didn't ask any of you guys to behave.
No, that's okay.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the budget. And I passed around some resolutions that we have. Some of them I'm going to try and get done now because they're not going to change. They're not controversial, and we can get them in and out of the way. We are going to have another budget meeting to discuss some other things that'll be coming forward. So with that, I know Pierre joined me on many of the Board of Finance meetings. What's happened now is the Board of Selectmen approved their budget, the Board of Education approved their budget. They handed it over to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance approved their budget last Tuesday. This is now not the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen's budget, it's the Board of Finance's budget. They're handing it to our committee because we're the liaison to the full RTM. And then once it's approved with whatever modifications come forward, it will be the RTM budget for the town. So I'll just start with anyone who wants to make comment on what they see, what they saw, good things, bad things, anything in between. And Pierre, since you were there for everyone but one, and I missed one also at the Board of Finance, you get to start.
Oh, lucky me.
Yeah, really.
What I'm going to start out with is, at least for me, this budget season between Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen, moving on to the Board of Finance, it felt as smooth as I can imagine it being. I mean, they had some, controversial items, which we'll, I'm sure, address later. But overall, it was pretty impressive to see the detailed work that went into each of the budgets. And so what we're being asked to look at right now, I just would say with my hand on heart, represents some good hard work by some very dedicated people. So that's just my starting point. I think one of the areas that we probably need to talk about is how the Board of Finance can allocate from different funds. And I know Jack has talked about this in the past. I will raise my hand and just say I'm not as troubled by the allocations this year. I kind of understand the thought process behind it. For example, they're allocating money for repaving parking lots at the schools to be bonded, right? And in general, we don't bond, repaving of surfaces. My understanding of that, and this is where I think it might tie into the sort of discussions we're having at district levels, but my understanding of why that occurs is that when that original budget was put forward, and they go through the approval process for the schools and so forth, the same sort of rigor was applied. And in order to really get the number down, they kind of looked at the parking lot stuff and said, well, if we only do a quarter of it now, we can cut off X 100,000 here and there. And of course, now they need to put it back because it needs to get done. So one of the things I'd like to talk about when we get to the budget is what are the guardrails that currently exist? And eventually, what are the guardrails that should exist? Because there does appear to be quite a bit of room for the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen to move money out of different funds and move it around, and that's part of their job, I would say, and they're thoughtful about it. They're trying to make sure that we bond long-term expenses that the residents of the town are going to enjoy over, 20-year period or 30-year period, like Great Island. And then the other expenses are expenses we should be incurring. So it's that gray area between those two, I think, that leave us with some room for discussion. Um, the second thing is, you know, they got all caught up over Cherry Lawn, right? I was sitting there listening to the debate going back and forth. Um, again, Cherry Lawn is a heavily used park resource. It has some issues, but if you look at them like piecemeal, park by park, open space by open space, there isn't this sort of overriding sense of what are our priorities here? Where should we be spending money? Um, and it goes without saying that Cherry Lawn, from what I've understood, is a parking nightmare. Sometimes it's a very heavily used park. So, it probably does make sense to do something. The third thing I just would say that I picked up is in the budget, particularly when they're talking about Cherry Lawn, but it'll be true pretty much throughout the town. When we touch something, I think of it as you got to bring it up to compliance. Well, compliance for our sake is, the American Disabilities Act. Like, what do we have to do? And again, like there isn't an overarching plan for this. Doesn't mean that the town doesn't want to do the right thing. I want to be clear about that. But we're also not under obligation to bring up 100% of our facilities to be 100% ADA compliant, right? And so that means, there needs to be some sort of overarching plan to really understand where are our priorities. And frankly, where does it just make more practical sense to put it in? And again, like on the Board of Finance, they really debated that back and forth. They did not like the fact, some of them, maybe all of them, that they created this like ADA subsection of it, which distorted what was actually going on. So, that was another area within the budget process that I found helpful to listen to. So I would encourage you to go back and try to listen to those sections if you really want to understand like the Board of Finance members' individual views on it. But I'd say those are the underlying like issues that came up as I sat through all of these meetings with Jack. And, I think the boards did the best they could with some of these issues. I do believe that there's work to be done to create some of these better overarching, I hate to call it a plan, but some sort of overarching strategic view of what we should be doing with our open space and the ADA compliance and how we should be going about it, and just to be smarter about it. And then the first one I mentioned, which is, are we, the RTM, happy with the degree of discretion that the different boards have to move money in and out of funds? Because those are ultimately dollars that we taxed ourselves on that now move into a fund that can be drawn on without necessarily having it come back to the RTM. I don't believe everything needs to come back to the RTM. I'm developing an opinion that says better guardrails would eliminate some of this, I'll call it angst that occurs as we get into discussion of it. So that'll be my opening comments, Jack. Some of them you agree with, some you have a different view on. Those were my takeaways. There isn't anything in the budget I'm particularly just troubled by right now.
Yeah, Pear, I'd like to comment on that. And by the way, I agree with you. I forget how many seasons I've now done the budget. This is my 4th or 5th year, and I think this was hands down the smoothest of any of them. So I think that was great. I mean, personally, and I was traveling a bit, so maybe I missed a meeting somewhere along the way, but I mean, I found it odd that all of a sudden the Board of Finance seems to be taking the lead on questions like ADA compliance or, do we want to handle park space things piece by piece or, in a bigger picture, for example, in the context of the whole plan for conservation and development, which is actually going to be coming out publicly in the summer. So it just felt to me I felt like the Board of Selectmen was having a conversation. I thought, pardon me, the Board of Finance was having a conversation I thought would have been had at the Board of Selectmen 2 months ago. So that was sort of my reaction is why is this popping up like this type of discussion? I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree on the proposals and issues, but it just felt to me to be like, out of place in the process, and I didn't quite understand, where that was coming from. I do agree, by the way, that I was a little bit surprised that I don't recall there was a single reference to POCD, which is a state mandated thing, which a lot of time has gone into and is going to be coming out. I think the first version's coming out May 7th, if I remember correctly.
Can you remind everyone what POCD stands for?
The state requires each city in Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken, it's every 10 years to do
Right.
like a medium range plan. So POCD stands for Plan for Conservation and Development. So my feeling is a ton of work is going into developing that. That in theory should be providing guidelines for lots of these things. And it struck me that I was struck by the absence of any reference to it.
I will add something to that, Charles, because it does do inventory, a lot of detail and other things on what we have in the town, from everything from traffic, sidewalks, schools, open space, and that. But it doesn't really get into the detail and that. And one of the reasons why there's an advisory group on the conservation is all our land use boards, that's planning and zoning and environmental protection and that for the Boy Scouts. They do a good job monitoring the development side, what zoning laws we're coming up with, what we have to address in that. Nobody's really watching the conservation side. So that was partially set up. But what you're going to hear me talk about at the end is a little bit more on the open space. And I'm a broken record on that for the last 4 or 5 years. So, but I'll wait to the end. Peter, do you want to comment on the Board of Ed? Peter O'Fanos.
Yeah. Well, it was very not surprising, but it was a welcome development that we had a relatively stress-free process. A lot of that had to do with the actual percentage number that was proposed and ultimately approved, which reflected in large part due to a change in how we're doing health insurance for the school. So I think it was very positive, and we're happy to have it that way.
Is there any other comments before I give some of mine?
Hey, can I just, Charles, so to your point about the ADA stuff being there at the Board of Finance, I think of it the same way as if we take up that right here, it's because we're looking at line items and items that we're questioning why it was in the Board of Selectmen's budget and pushed forward, right? And I think that's what happened with the Board of Finance. I don't believe their intent was to go down that rabbit hole. And in fact, I almost at times I thought they were trying to dig themselves out of that rabbit hole and just look at the numbers that were being proposed to, fix Cherry Lawn and ignore the fact that any of it was ADA. Because the ADA bit, like I said, is more of a, well, if you touch it, you need to bring it up. So they got caught in a chicken and egg on that for a while. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was kind of how I came away from understanding it.
So I have a
Yes.
slightly different perspective on that. And so for the Boy Scouts, when you look at US government, there's checks and balances between the president, the judicial, and the congressional, the legislative. The RTM is the legislative body of this town. And I look at the Board of Finance as one of the checks and balances to the Board of Ed, as well as the Board of Selectmen. And that's why they're asking certain questions. So if strategy wasn't proposed on ADA, I thought that whole discussion was a very good one. And in fact, this committee and the remainder of the RTM, we're the checks and balances on the Board of Finance. So we're the next level down to say, we agree with this, we don't agree with this, and go from there. I think that the Board of Finance did an excellent job in their discussion on the departments. I think the strategy and the need for a strategy on ADA was exemplary. I think the conversation, and please understand, there are times that members of our committee do discuss things with members of the Board of Finance throughout the budget process because we attempt to work together, not as opposing views. They deferred post 53 because they just didn't have all their ducks in a row. And I think Jim Palin put it well when they said that we pay $500,000 for the Stanford services for the paramedics. They're asking for $350,000 for us. There's, if you add the two of them, those together, it's $850,000, which represents half of Post 53's business. And it's not that we don't want to support Post 53. And for those who are in the Boy Scouts, my daughter was a member of that, so we're very loyal. But the fact is that there's certain things that we didn't understand the relationship between the Friends and Post and the library, which operates in a similar things. We have a very clear understanding. So deferring it to say, let's work on this, and then we can figure out what the town wishes to provide is a very positive thing. The concern is that the same questions that some of us were asking, as well as the Board of Finance, wasn't asked at the Board of Selectmen's meeting. And I think that's part of the reason why the Board of Finance was taking their role. The same thing with the ADA. I think that those were really positive, good developments. Even the discussion on Cherry Lawn was positive. But I have a different opinion of Cherry Lawn than you do, Pierre. Mm-hmm. For 3-4 years, I've been asking for an open space strategy. I even created a template of how it would be: conservation and recreation. And recreation is either structured or unstructured. We were starting to do it in our own committee when Jenny Schwartz was still a member of FMB. Then Jenny and Patty were trying to do an inventory. They do not have an inventory of our parks. The master plan is old and it's outdated. And it was created before the town purchased Great Island. And so one of my complaints is that we're seeing capital projects and investment in silos. We see things for Park and Rec. We see things of capital development on the schools, which is also considered open space. We see things for town structures like Highland Farms. We have Great Island. And who's ever playing the banjo the loudest gets the funds without understanding how it integrates to the rest of the town and what we're looking for. It's simple things like, do we want 80% of the population to be within a 15-minute car ride to one of the open spaces in town? Do we want 50% of our population to be within walking distance to a park or a playground? Those are strategic things that then help set the tenor for what's going on. I tend to side with the people that voted no. And it's one of the things that I'll be raising at another meeting, our next meeting, when we have the better attendance because some people are away on vacation. This was the same traffic study that they were doing before, except now they threw an ADA component to it. This doesn't, yes, there needs to be some areas, but they're talking about over programming in Cherry Lawn. We've had 3 properties that used to take in Park and Rec as well as other town activities at the 3 schools that have been closed for construction over the last couple of years. So that's not going right, even though the schools will open in September. That's not being added to their list of where they're programming. So to do a study in October or do it in the summer before they've re-looked at their properties that they control, what the town controls, what the schools control, I think is basically a waste of money. And at this stage, with everything else of what people may want to do at Great Island, we're doing access, which will come back to us maybe in June or September with what that final bid is. We need to be more diligent and have a strategic plan at this time. It's the same thing they were asking for the ADA. It's the same thing that they're asking for actually for Post. And so that's why it was a split vote, because the Board of Selectmen needs to come back, and I'm more than willing to run that. I've done that in my professional career, facilitating strategic development. We need to come up with a high-level strategic plan for all of our open space, what we want it to be, and then investment should be based upon what the strategic plan is calling for and how we're accomplishing that. What we're hearing is nothing but tactics and coming out of silos without it integrating into the other properties and assets of the town. As I said, the plan of conservation and development does not get into the detail on the strategy. While it will address the strategy on development, it doesn't do so on the conservation side at the level we would want in an open space. So that's part of the reason why some members of the Board of Finance and something that I'm going to be proposing is, we can defer this and wait until you come back with an open space strategy so we understand how this integrates. The other things that I was a little bit uncomfortable with is that the investment income that was increased by $400,000 this year, they increased it by $500,000 last year. And the treasurer will make the treasurer's number for the current year of 26. They're not going to make the extra $500,000. And that means that reduces the available funds that we have from overages and other things like that. The only thing that saves some of the revenues and the fees is that approximately $600,000 of building income that was expected to come in at 25 didn't come in at 25 and in fact came in at 26. So that sort of is going to offset the projections on the investment income. They moved, contrary to the Board of Selectmen guidance, they moved 5 things into the HHR project, without the understanding that by moving it into that product, the construction manager gets paid 5% of whatever we spend. It's not on what the budget was, it's what actually gets spent. And so for the approximately 900, that's adding $45,000 to our taxpayers. In addition, because that's going into the bonding area, we added approximately $1 million of bonding that we didn't need to do because we had the funds this year to pay for it. And so they went against policy. They moved in maintenance items. The Board of Ed didn't request that it be bonded. In fact, they had it in their maintenance area. It's costing our taxpayers more money, and we added to debt. I wrote to John and Jim expressing my disapproval of that. And that's where, in fact, what you were mentioning, Pierre, in the last budget, charter revision, one of the suggestions were, and this was partially discussed at the Rules Committee, was that the RTM should be able to overturn with a decision by the Board of Finance, but it was based upon a request by either the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen. And at Rules, if you might recall, I said to John, no, that should be something that if the RTM just wants to do it, we can. And had we had that power, I would have proposed to take the $915,000 out of HHR because those were all out of scope of that project. And it's only because the Board of Finance asked for it that the committee actually approved it because it wasn't on their lists. The second thing is they were managing to an increase from last year's mill rate to this year's. It took me a couple of meetings to understand while Jim was saying, oh, that that's a 20 basis point area. Now, a basis point is part of the mill rate for the scouts. Our grand list is over 11 million, $1 billion rather. So to move the mill rate by 1 basis point, you need to find something that's $113,000. But they were talking about much less on things that were a three mill rate adjustment that they were talking is a 20%. They were managing to the percentage increase of the mill rate from last year to this year. That's not how we should be doing a budget. If that doesn't say that we don't reduce things out of a budget that keeps the mill rate low, but we can't be kicking the can down the road. We can't be constantly expecting that we're going to have overages in other parts of our budget that we can pay down the capital. And we definitely don't need to be increasing debt when we know we have quite a lot of debt coming down the road. And so those were my disappointments in how they did it. Otherwise, quite honestly, they did an absolutely super job. Their discussions were good. Their discussions on the various component parts of the budget were excellent. And I don't believe the investment income was substantiated on what they increased it by. And I actually took it as another way to just reduce the increase in the mill rate. And that's not what we should be doing. Now, I know that analysis was done. I'm going to be speaking with Jenny about that analysis to have a better understanding on it. And one of the things that I want to do, and anybody who wants to join me on this, I'm going to work out what the cash flow is for our budget. They did a lot of straight line in their analysis. But if you go to the revenue side, many of our grants come in at certain times of the year. So when we're getting certain funds to straight line that, it isn't right. The obvious ones that we get the funds for the park stickers. In May, we get the funds for the dump stickers. But there's other grants that we don't get to February and March. In addition, there's certain expenditures that go on. And if you look at the Board of Finance analysis that they do every month that I've referenced to, it has a history of what percentage of that line item is been expended as a percentage of their budget over the last 5 years. So again, that isn't necessarily a straight line either. So I want to have a little bit better understanding of what the cash flow is to determine what they were doing, with the understanding that even though we say that we collect taxes in July, and we have a very high collection rate, we don't collect 99% of our taxes for the July payment in July. We collect less, and we collect some of that in August. Same thing happens in the January payment. We actually collect those in December, January, and February. So I just want to do a very high level cash flow analysis so that we can have a better understanding of whether or not this made sense or not. I'm not saying that any of us have a crystal ball on what the interest rates are going to be, even though Diamond made a comment in the newspaper today about where interest rates have to go. The fact of the matter is that something that I'd like to have a little bit better understanding of. So that's my overall. Did the Board of Finance do a good job? Yes. Is there areas where I think we can improve? The answer to that is yes as well. So,
Hey, Jack, in this cash flow analysis, is that so we end up with a better understanding of the liquidity requirement that Moody's puts on us? Because ultimately, that liquidity requirement is what's smoothing out any cash flow swings throughout the year.
well, it's not that. Is that if you're calculating what the investment income is, you have to know what the available funds are.
Sure.
So the fact is just by straight lining the expenses and the income is not a realistic.
Okay, so you're just focused on the interest income earning potential.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
all right. So I just want to make that point clear in case anyone else was a little confused by the cash flow analysis.
The
Okay.
other thing is just a minor recommendation that I'll make to Jay-Z and to Jim. On the side, and I've been around doing this for a while, the 12% was developed 20 years ago. And if we ever hit 20%, we don't have a AAA rating. It was used to when do we need to increase taxes just to build the general fund up, which is essentially our checking account for the Boy Scouts. Right now, if we go below 16%, Moody's is going to be upset. So that should be what the new bottom line is 16%. And I've heard that from discussions with Moody's. So, just we can throw out the 12%, which makes it look like we have, all this extra cash. We don't. And
yeah, but I think they are managing to that 16%.
they're doing a great job, but let's at least have the number being more realistic than what they have on that sheet of paper.
Should be corrected. Yes, I would agree.
Right. So that's where I'm just saying I'm sending over a suggestion. It's just little things here. And we're managing close to 18, but that also determines what amount of money they take from the year. Initially, the amount that they were going to transfer was $2,250,000, and they ended up moving it up to 2.5, again, to lower the increase from the mill rate. And somebody one time said during one of the meetings, I'm not identifying them, who said, I'd like to have the increase under 4%. Well, but that's not what we're not doing it, because the reality is it's starting to disguise what it really costs to run the town. And our taxpayers need to know, if you want these services, if you want this investment in the schools, if you want the investment in our infrastructure, if you want to do flood mitigation and other things like that, this is what it costs. And so I'm a little bit, that's where my thing is. What does it cost to really manage this town in order to, and have the taxpayers understand, look, I don't want a 4 or 5% mill rate increase. I have to pay taxes too. But I don't want something that we're kicking the cans down the road, so that eventually people start looking at what we owe and what we're going to owe, as our debt is going to be about 238 mil after this April decision, and we have another 50 to 90 million coming down from Middlesex, and we're only paying off 9 to 10 mil a year if you look at what the payoffs are in that. I am happy that they changed from not paying principal for 2 years to 1 year. That was a very good move and was supported by by majority on the Board of Finance. But even the ones who supported it were pressing for, instead of level debt, for level principal paydowns. There aren't, I was told by somebody, that's not what goes on. It may not goes on in the market, in California or in some other states, but in Connecticut, there's very few towns that are not doing level principal. You have to be number one AAA rated, and we were the only town in Connecticut that was doing a 2-year deferral of principal, and that adds money to us on our debt service and everything going down the road. I think that Jim Palin was excellent in describing that he doesn't want debt service to exceed 10% of the budget. The other thing that's you'll see in the pages that I start to put together, the mill rate started at 1.5% growth, which is really, really high. There was a challenge to one of the construction projects, because it's a percentage of construction which determines what their value will be. And so that reduced the increase by 0.4. So the growth in the grand list was 1.1, which is still an extremely high growth in the grand list. That's bad news of what happened this year. The good news is that 0.4 is the starting point for the growth in the grand list next year. And typically you're happy if you get between a half a percent to 0.75%. And with that 0.4, just the starting point for next year, we should expect another good growth in the grand list, which is very positive for us. But here's the other thing. If the grand list grows, the increase of the grand list multiplied times the current year's mill rate provides the town extra money. It's just money that we didn't have because the grand list grew. So this year, my calculation of what the increase of 1.1 was, it provided an extra $2 million of funds available to the town at the current year's mill rate. That's part of the reason why I was saying that we had the money to pay for the $915,000 capital that the Board of Ed had. The money was there. So those are all the different things that we'll get into further discussion on. But again, the Board of Finance did an excellent job. The overall budget was well done by the two boards. And some of the things that we'll be talking about out of what's being done in the districts is there's still some accounting things that have to be resolved. So with that, I'd like to start going into certain, are there any questions on that before I go? And we go on to next? Liz, go ahead.
Hi. So Mr. Davis, thank you very much for allowing us to listen to you, and you're explaining some of these major concepts in town. We are going to take a few minutes. We don't have like an unlimited amount of time, but we want to take some time tonight to discuss the procedures, the process, some of the topics that you covered. And I personally found some of those areas very interesting. I don't generally pay that much attention, which is not good citizenship. And maybe we can get more attention because our scouts are going to learn about this. So to the entirety of the RTM that is participating in this and the time that you give to volunteer
let me give you a little bit
of
process. And first of all, your citizenship by hosting a bunch of Boy Scouts and working with them is far above some of the stuff that we're doing in government. Because you're shaping the minds of the kids and the adults and citizens for the future. So don't undersell yourself. What's going to go on is both of the two boards voted on it, the Board of Finance, and the final say is the RTM, and we're going to be meeting on March 13th, which is typically called Budget Night. And the various committees of the RTM will be reporting on their purviews, and F&B will be the lead on a good part of it, bringing things through. So
said March, you meant May 13th.
May 13th, yes, yeah.
Back to the future, Doug.
Yeah, really. Do any of you have questions over there on this side that we might answer?
Ben, gentlemen, do any of you have questions thus far for our RTM? They're asking you directly before we sign out. Do you have any questions?
I don't think you do. I think that you did a really good job explaining it, and I want to thank you for having us.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for having us. That was very nice.
Well, it's my pleasure. If you do have any questions, my email is jdavis@darien.ct.gov, and feel free to email me at any time with questions, and I'll try and get you back an answer. So thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
So I behaved.
Oh, no.
You can still keep behaving, Jack. It's okay. We won't mind.
I'm not sure I want to. All right. So I thought that we might go through some of the resolutions that we have here. because I don't think anything's going to change till our next meeting.
Mhm. Jack, just a comment, and I think I'm going to also agree with everybody. This year has been pretty clean, pretty smooth, and no major surprises. Everything was very reasonable. And I attended in person the first board of finance meeting, and I saw where all these big capital expense was coming on the 75,000 for Cherry Lawn. And I think that my sense is it is again same with what happened with many other, including Gray Island, is the expense toward consultants. And so that I attended that meeting and I saw how it went and how there were questions that the Parks and Rec Commission couldn't answer, neither John, but there was nobody that really had the knowledge on the ADA compliance. So we really need to rely on consultants and paying again a fee for circulation and to address that the seniors cannot attend because the seniors cannot even, there's probably just one handicap space to park and nobody really enforces anything. So again, I saw how it was coming, and I saw in the Zoom meeting, and I just don't agree in all the way that we do these expenses. Parks and Rec back then mentioned how they distribute some duties by some of the staff, and they were able to capture some efficiencies. And why not we can have somebody really training on to be compliant? Why we continue pushing for consultants? And again, it's not a holistic for all the parks. It was really specific for Cherry Long, and we only changing the faucets 40K. But we need to go through these consultants. So I was pretty bothered about it, and I'm still. So.
All right. So overall, we're going to talk about the strategy and a potential adjustment to the capital budget at a later meeting. But right now, I do want to go into some of the things that we have to do. The first thing is that we had this 6-year capital plan. We do it because the state requires the town to have a 6-year capital plan. We already had a 5-year one. And we're really going to be the only committee that's going to look at this in total detail. So the only question that I really had on the capital plan, and I got my answer, was on the parking capital plan in a year 2930. There was a $7 million investment there. And so I spoke to Jen Chinesky asking what was that? And apparently that's when we're anticipating that we'll do a rebuild of the Norotan Heights station with a canopy, and we pay half of that and the state pays the other. So that's the placeholder for that. Nothing that we have to deal with, but that explains the $7 million in that plan. Virtually everything else, to a certain extent, looked reasonable. Again, this is only things that we know are going to be available for grants, or we have something that's known here.
Hey, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, but, and I smiled a little to myself. This is the one and only capital plan I heard presented where basically it's meant to be a catch-all to make sure that we don't get tripped up and are unable to apply for grants. Because if we don't have it in the plan, we immediately can't apply for the grant.
if we don't have it approved, and we were doing 5 years anyway, so we
Yeah.
always had that. The state is requiring every town to have this document and approved by the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM.
Right.
And so I've asked committees to look at it, but ultimately the only one reporting on this is going to be us.
But the fact that we approve it doesn't mean there's any authorization to go off and spend any of the money in the plan. It's really
Absolutely correct.
just a plan. So whether it's a $7 million number in 2030 or a $9 million, it's not really going to matter. I mean, it matters because we should be putting a reasonable plan together. But that was my takeaway. It's like, oh, okay.
But it also sort of identifies some of the other things that are going on, because
that's
we
true.
can talk about that we have a 3 to 5 million access in Great Island, but there's 2 drainage projects, salt box, that we may be seeing in September, October timeframe. There's another drainage project, and there's some sewer projects that are going on. So seeing a $7 million project, I guarantee that's not coming out of the general fund that we're paying for it, but that's another potential $7 million of debt. So that's good to know. We typically have the fire engines there, even though that's being worked on. And we don't go and bond those until we get delivery, which is now 3 to 4 years out of when we put in the order. So yes, this is placeholders.
Yeah,
in no way
that's all I'm trying to say is the close green ones are more specific to visible capital expenditures coming. And then as you move out the timeline for the 6 years, they've got placeholders in there. And at least
the only ones I really care about is this year's, which we are doing, and what they think they might need for next year. After that, it's like any good long-range plan that you might put together. You only take it out of your desk if you were right. Otherwise, you never remind anybody that you did it.
That is correct.
So anyway, so we have to approve it. So I just thought we might be able to get this out of the way. Is there any objection to that? One less thing we have to do later. All right.
Jack, I'm sorry for being obtuse, but I mean, like, I don't think any of us, I mean, certainly I never saw my whole life a capital plan that increases for the next 3 years and then goes down rapidly thereafter for the remainder of the planning period. So, I mean, we're basically being asked to approve something which is unrealistic.
We're being asked to approve that somebody has prepared a capital plan, not the accuracy of it.
So your comment is not offline. I mean, that's why I started out by saying these are placeholders. And if you look at it like a normal plan where you're really like digging down deep trying to figure out where you're going to be in 6 years, that this is not the plan we're approving. We're approving a plan that has placeholders that ensures the town can always apply for grants in each of the areas of the placeholders.
Yeah, and a rough idea of some of the things that might be coming down.
Yeah.
But again, even for 27, none of this has any bearing. If you let me read the resolution that will be before us. I have all the resolutions for the most part because they're the same resolutions as last year with different numbers. The resolution will read, whereas the most recent accounting practices require documentation establishing the approval of a capital improvement plans, now therefore be it resolved that the representative town meeting hereby approves the fiscal year 2027 to 2032 capital improvement plan as presented in the fiscal year 27 proposed budgets. That's the only thing we're doing. We're not attesting to its accuracy. We're not committing to any funds. We're saying somebody gave us this. We have it. We're going to approve it and send it off to the state. So we get whatever little grant money we get. But it is for the LoCIP grant. So can I have somebody move that?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have Pierre and I have Bill. All in favor? say aye. People are capable of abstaining if you want to. So is that everybody raise their hand?
Yes.
Or do I have any abstentions?
No.
Okay, fine. So that's unanimous. And Charles, the tough thing is I have to explain this to the full RTM, or exactly who takes the same concept that you just said. Because you're right. The second one that I want to get out of the way, and I'll only say to this committee, what the why we did this. In the past, we never had the resolution that I'm going to make, the resolution appropriating $148,600,000 to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorize the issuance of refunding bonds or amounts available in unassigned fund balance to finance such appropriation. About 15 years ago, there was a drop in the interest rates. The Board of Finance tried to get it through the various boards to get that done, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and to the RTM. And by the time we got it through the process, we missed the window. So it was then decided, just give them the right to go do this for the next year. What it does is that this resolution in its entirety says the approval that we gave them last year ends on June 30th. And so this allows them to take care of any of the general obligation bond issued in 2016, 17, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, and 25 as listed as the prior bonds. And so that's just good business so that if an opportunity comes up, they can handle it without having to come back to us on that, because all they're doing is refinancing. So I need somebody to move that. I have Louisa and Peter D. Seconds. All in favor? Okay, so that's unanimous. What I'm trying to do is get some of these things off our table. So when we're talking about the budget, when we're going through the final numbers on the budget on some other things, we can have time to do that. Pierre, your hand is raised.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. 1 second. Why'd that happen?
That's all right. I recognize you. We can move forward. All right. The next one is, and this I slightly disagree, and I had this conversation with Josh Kaufman, is that I'm looking up behind this one. We're going to get a full resolution that has parts A, B, C, D, E, F, and G and H, G only, that deals with each of the sections of the of the budget. And but we're going to be approving capital in section A, and you don't approve things if you don't have the funding for it. So the 2.5 million that the Board of Finance approved from unassigned balance to fund capital projects, in when we do it on the RTM, we will be doing that before we take on the capital projects, because we want to ensure that this funding has been approved. Otherwise, we would have to change the mill rate significantly. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Well, maybe I will, because I sent this out. There's some red marks because I'm going to be doing some changes from last year's. Letting Doug back in. So this one for the 2.5 is whereas the Board of Finance has reviewed the June 30th, 2027 6 projected general fund unassigned balance, and whereas the Board of Finance has determined that it would like to utilize a portion of the unassigned fund balance to fund capital projects that would otherwise have been funded through property taxes in the fiscal year 2027 budget. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the representative town meeting hereby authorizes and approves this appropriation in the amount of $2,500,000 from the unassigned fund balance to fund capital projects that would have otherwise been funded through the transfer of the general fund in the 2027 budget. In other words, through taxes. So if you have no problem, I'd like to get this out of the way because nobody's changing. I don't perceive anybody suggesting that we change this number. So do I have somebody moving this? I have Charles P. And I'll have Charles T. second. Does anybody need a little more explanation of what it is? We take, if we move things into the general fund, the only thing that we can use it for other than a special appropriation, because typically we don't use it for, we can't apply it to operating budget, is for capital or pay down of debt. So one of the things that we didn't have this year is for the last couple of years prior to this year, we were ending up with about $1 million more in investment income. And that was primarily due because we had more funds than we had before anticipated in our thing, mostly from HHR because we didn't start that project prior, but we bonded for about 23 mil. And yet delayed the start by about 18 months. So can I take a vote on this? All in favor? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's unanimous. I see no abstentions or anything else, so we took care of that. I'm going to hold off on the capital project because the 75 is over there. I'm going to go to Resolution C of the overall budget. Resolve that an appropriation of $130,179,922 is hereby made in the general fund for the education operating budget. Can I have somebody move that? I have Louisa. I need a second. I have Doug. Is there any comment on the education budget other than it was probably one of the, from my own perspective, it was one of the best budgets I've seen in years. And it was excellently presented.
I have a comment. I think that it needs to be pointed out to the public that, you know, we've done a lot to attract better teachers, keep good teachers, pay teachers more, educate teachers. And that's a big increase in the cost of this budget. I know you mentioned the change in, someone mentioned the change in the health insurance, but really the overwhelming, I think, increase in this budget comes from trying to help our students have, you know, quality teachers.
Well, if we didn't do the change to self-funding our health insurance, that would have been over $1 million more in their budget and would have pushed them over 4%. So, and that relates to 10 more basis points approximately in 9 to 10 basis points in the actual mill rate. So, yes.
And that's unaffordable. I mean, that's not realistic to increase the mill rate that much, is it?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, Doug. Yes, we'd like to still be in 2 to 3% increases in our mill rate. But based upon what the increases of other towns have in their school budget this year, as opposed to the 3.51 that we have.
Higher, a lot higher.
Yeah, they're at 6-7%. And I'm talking about towns that are in our DERG are very high this year. So while our debt has increased by 16%, which is really driving what's going on, the fact of the matter is we probably will still be, other than Greenwich. Greenwich is always the lowest mill rate in the town and in the state. And that's because their grand list takes about 15% of the total grand list of this whole state. So they have a lot of funds. They also have about 80 to 85 million in unassigned fund balance, which none of the rest of us can even come close to. But we're going to be number 2 on this this resolution. It's the only one that we're not going to be the lead on, because Eliza and the Education Committee will be reporting most of that. And a lot of this will not be presented by me. Either Peter or Beth will be presenting our report on this. And so it's duly noted. If they don't mention it, we will be mentioning that, because that's a good part of what the union contract did, and some of the things that they put in there, such as giving credits and other things like that, tightening up the other grades and other things like that, which was good. And the incentive to stay, so that we're not paying for substitute teachers the way we have in the past. So with that, are there any other comments on the Board of Ed budget? If not, we can vote. All in favor? John, are you voting one way or another? Oh, you're voting yes?
I'm voting yes. I had my
Okay.
hand. Sorry.
Sorry, that's all right.
Mm.
My angle isn't always great. Okay. So I have to go back to another sheet to see if I actually have their number on some of the sheets that I printed out, and of course I didn't. So while I'm talking about this, oh, I do have it. That's good to know. It's historically that F&B committee has voted not only on the Board of Selectmen full operating budget, but we vote separately on the library grant. And so we're going to allow Pierre and Louisa to discuss the library budget, and then we'll move it and vote separately on the library grant funds first, and then on the Board of Selectmen budget. So sorry that I just threw that to the two of you.
Good, Louisa, it's over to you, because I have nothing to say. The library budget is so tight and well run, and the Friends of the Library do such a wonderful job stepping in and, basically picking up the capital and picking up a lot of special programs. I think the main thing, if you're not aware of it, is they are revamping the lower level to be kind of like a teen kids center, to really make it even more attractive for the kids that come and use the library regularly. I mean, it's a well thought out plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, Louisa, but they got a grant to cover the cost. Was it a grant? No, it was
They have a grant for the children's.
yeah, but I think
program.
that they got a grant to cover that, but I thought it was more of a not just a grant. What's the word I'm looking for?
It's like paying for a seat at a college.
Yes, correct. I'm
Right.
just thinking of the wrong word. So it's funded with sufficient money to pay for the position theoretically in perpetuity. So it's not impacting the library's budget. So, I'm just always in awe at the financial support behind the library, the incredible efficiency of this hybrid town, private funded operation. So there isn't anything other than those items. I don't think there's anything unusual in the budget this year compared to last year. What did I miss, Louisa?
No, I think is again well run. He's very transparent. The director is very straightforward, and again, it is a very nice partnership between the town and the friends, and more that trust continues to develop, and that is something that is good to see. So again, it was a one of a kind grant or donation even.
Yeah.
And again is the jewel of we talk about our schools but also our library, so we're very happy also to see how well it's managed, so nothing
One challenge they continue to have, parking. It's so popular
Yes.
that they are forever struggling with parking, and they
at
make
certain
it,
times, yes.
yes, and they make a very conscious effort to think about the programming to try to, be as efficient as possible. They don't have a lot of programming that overlaps and creates a crunch on the parking, or at least they do their best to try to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Important will be what happened with the police department next door. So they will be, sometimes it's quite empty, the other lot, but anyway, it's another conversation, that big problem on the building on the police department.
There are two things I want to add only because I've been around. Kara has been a godsend to the library. She is, in my own personal opinion,
Mm-hmm.
much better than the prior director.
Yes.
And she's done improvements just not only to morale, but also to the reporting and the coordination between the library and the town administrator and the director of finance, which we did not have before. And quite honestly, yes, the board is very good. Yes, the friends are excellent. But Kara has done an extremely positive job in taking what was a good library and making it even better. And so that's one thing that I like to mention.
Yeah, and very creative with new ideas, and I attended last summer the book club. So they selected the top, the highest donations on the book clubs, and they invite basically all the new books and publishing companies, and the reps come and explain, and it's really, really a lot of creativity that she has brought, and really very enjoyable.
And she's brought the salaries of those working there to be competitive with the other libraries. Which,
yeah, I forgot to mention that. That was an important
which
part of
has
the
taken
budget.
us about 4 or 5 years to get to, but they did it in a very measured and positive way. And they actually do merit increases. So, not everybody just gets a blanket increase there. So that's really good. The only thing that was discussed, there isn't finally an agreement that was done last year or so. And an incident came up that if you kept people employed during COVID, the federal government was returning certain money. They got the money. I think it was like 120,000, not more than that. And they went to John Zagroski and asked what they should do with it, because it's based upon salaries that, in fact, the town paid. And John said that they should use it. And they did use it for a good purpose. I believe it was security cameras and a couple of other capital improvements to the library. But because of that, they're going to be modifying the agreement between the library and the town to account for those one-offs should things like that come up again. So I don't know what the end result will be from that, but that was the only thing on the library that I thought had any discussion of what it is, even though everybody agreed that how they use the money was excellent. But that's what you would expect from them, typically anyway. So, do I have a motion to move this and second it? And since I tend to see Pierre and Louisa's hands up, that's who I'm going to take as moving and seconding it. I'm going to give Louisa first billing, Pierre.
Good.
And
She
Pierre.
can also talk. She doesn't want to talk.
But yeah, we'll determine, because we do come back and talk about the library, and that might be something else that we're going to be handing off from me doing the entire presentation, because I'm getting bored doing it, and everybody's bored of me doing it anyway. So, we can start to do that. But so we're ready to vote. Is everybody in favor of let me give you the exact amount so you know what we're voting
I
on.
was going to say, you didn't give us the amount, so.
Yeah, I had it here someplace, and of course I just lost it. Oh, here it is. The
Now we can't hear you.
oh, yeah, that's my other problem. Is $4,846,267, an increase of $156,317, or an increase of 3.33%. We have that. Are we ready to vote on the library? All in favor of the library grant, please raise your hand. Okay, that's another unanimous.
No, I have to abstain.
Okay,
And I have to abstain because I know you complimented the director of the library, but she's not an employee of the town. And recently I was involved in a legal matter that involved her status as a town employer, not a town employee. So I have to abstain.
okay, fair enough.
I'm not so sure in the future we shouldn't approve these budgets on some kind of pro rata basis for residents in the town too, because the town's giving $4 million, and there's some out of town fees for users of the library, and there needs to be some kind of parity, and we're not delineating that ever. I don't think. Maybe they are at the library board. It's not the town's job to necessarily do that.
We don't do that. They maintain a list of any non-Darien library user, and we get paid fees from the state for that. So we are reimbursed. Interesting enough, does anyone guess which town or small area in this area is the biggest user of Darien Library who isn't a Darien resident?
Oh, I mean, Darien residents are the largest user.
Right, but who's the second largest user?
I want to say New Canaan, but I can't quite remember who it was.
Seems to me like it'd be Norwalk.
Well, you're right, but go to a section in Norwalk.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. And the reason why we have so many people from Rowayton coming here is that before we had any of these apartments here, empty nesters had to move to either New Canaan or Rowayton once they sold their big house, but they wanted to stay in the area.
Mhm.
And so many of the people may actually still have Darien library cards of what they're using. But that's why Rowayton is the biggest user. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can get to by the way, the resolution that we just voted on that I didn't read was resolved that an appropriation of $4 million plus is hereby made within the Selectmen's operating budget for the Darien Library grant. I should have read that first. I didn't. Shame on me. So now we can go to section B, which is resolved that an appropriation of $61,781,903 is hereby made in the general fund for the Selectmen's operating budget. Do I have somebody move that?
I'll move that.
Do I have somebody second that?
I'll second that.
Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion? I have Charles T. And I need a second. I'll take Doug. All right. Is there any comments on the Board of Selectmen budget overall? I am going to say something, and part of this is my fault, but we've had a lot of turnover in F&B, and some of the areas had very good reviews of the budgets. Others, I have a feeling that people weren't sure what they were supposed to do. So our June meeting, I'm inviting some folks that used to be on F&B back to talk about how they reviewed it for the Board of Finance and how they reviewed it in F&B and how we worked closely with the Board of Finance folks to discuss the various component parts in that. And this is so that we do a better job than we did last year, this year rather, just to improve and, add to the depth of what we have here. Again, part of that is also that, we should be actually going through the budget. We're not at the state yet that we can do it this year, but we should be going through Public Works and having a discussion of what went on in the Public Works budget. We should have a discussion of what went on in Human Services, in General Government, in Emergency Services, Public Health and Safety, Park and Rec, and have those discussions in our own budget, maybe prior to even the Board of Finance discussing it. So when we're listening to the Board of Finance meetings, we know what our position is. So I'm going to plan to do that in June, and invite some people to join us to go through what they did in the past year. And partly shame on me because I had hoped to have that done this year, but with everything and the timing and everything, we didn't get to it. So we're ready to vote. All in favor of the Board of Selectmen budget, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good enough. So that passes unanimously. That brings us to Resolution D, which is really an addition that shows that we can add. And it's resolved that the above appropriations totaling $191,961,825 are for the purchase of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2025, and ending on June 30th, 2027, as shown by the budget this day approved. Do I have somebody? That was basically adding C and B. So do I have somebody to move that? I have Holly. And for the second, I have John. So the fact that we can add, can we vote to approve it?
So moved. Or yes.
Okay, so that's unanimous. I am not doing the mill rate at this time. But I am going to Resolution F, which is resolved that the town of Darien, acting through the Board of Selectmen and subject to the approval of said town at the annual budget meeting of the representative town meeting to be held on May 11, 2026, be authorized to borrow on a note or notes the town the sum of $5 million or so much thereof as may be necessary for the general expenses of the town pending the collection of either or both of the said semi-annual installments of taxes on or prior to June 30th, 2027. That's basically a authorization that if we're haven't had good collections, that actually is moved to 10 million during COVID and then dropped back down. In all my years of being on the RTM, that has never been invoked, but we do have it there. So I need somebody to move that. I have Doug. I need somebody to second it. I have Bill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Done, that's unanimous. Because the budget was so good this year, we're moving through this quickly also. Peter, do you have a question?
No, I think I better hold on. No,
That's right,
just
I got it.
the software creates a raised hand.
Okay. So the last item that we'd be addressing today before I'm going to give another resolution for us to do is we're running long. Is the various sewer assessment, sewer capital fund, parking lot administration fund, parking lot capital fund, recreation program fund, and the Great Island Management Fund. Do we want to do that today or hold off? I'm
Is
going
the
to hold
Great
off.
Island number right?
No, it's not. I just looked at that.
I was like, I don't want to do that one today.
No, we're not doing that one because of that. Okay. So here's the last resolution I'd like to do today. And I'll tell you the reason why. The Norotan Heights Fire Department retaining wall is going to need some extra funds in order to complete the project. There was a concern of the timing of it because we didn't want to stop the project for not having funds. And I specifically, the original bond resolution that we passed, I believe in 2023, was for $2,001,100. And the range of what they're asking for, it will be between 90 to 135,000. I specifically asked John Zagroski at the rules meeting whether or not that was coming back to the RTM. And John answered, yes, the decision was made that's coming to the RTM. The next night, when Jim Palin asked whether or not he needed to reserve some money out of their contingency for that, John didn't give the same answer. And the number changed from 135 to 90. And I think it needs to come back to the RTM for two reasons. Number one, we're amending a bond resolution, which means that the RTM needs to approve that. But number two, anything really over $50,000 at adjusting an appropriation and bond, or maybe $75,000, we can work on what the number is. I want to have that as one of the ordinances that it comes back to the RTM for approval, that there isn't a discussion. If they're worrying about the timing, this could have easily been done by the Board of Selectmen at the $135,000 in their March meeting. It could have been done by the Board of Finance at any one of their special meetings, and we could have approved that in the April meeting. And if it ended up only needing 90, but they authorized 135,000, anything that's unused at the end of a bond is rescinded and it's not bonded. So it doesn't give them a green light to spend that money. It was only for what was needed. So I'd like it from our committee to strongly be resolved that it's strongly recommended that any addition to the original Norotan Heights retaining wall appropriation and bond be also addressed not only by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, but also brought back to the RTM for final approval. So that's my resolution that I will then send on to John if we pass it. Is there any comments, discussion, anything else like that?
So the $2 million, there was some discussion before that might be not all appropriated or not all used to do that. So it's actually overrunning the.
Yes.
Not going to be.
But you also have to think that the original estimate that we got was being held for 18 months before they even started work on it. And so I would imagine over the last 24 months or so, with all the different increases in things like steel that they're using and other things along that line, that there might be some increases of what they had to do. So
We-
I'm not opposed that we're approving it. I
Yeah.
just wanted to come back to the RTM so we have a better discussion of what exactly constituted the 135. We're not approving it. We're instructing the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance that we don't want contingency being used on this. It should come back to us for our discussion as well.
And they should provide some numbers, shouldn't they? I mean, they should show us where this is. If it's in a steel cost, I can understand that. There's a lot of steel out there right now.
All I'm saying is that when they come back, we will have that explanation. And so for transparency and everything else, I'd like it to come back to the RTM. So can somebody move that? I have Charles P. I need a second on that for us to vote. I have Peter O. Any other discussion on that?
Do we have any assurances that this is the last time they're going to come back to the well for more money in this project? Or
I think that all I'm trying to do at this time, I'm not approving what money they're coming back or even an amount. What I'm saying is
it has to
on
be
this
voted on.
project,
Yeah.
bring it back to us. That's the only thing I'm putting down, that we voted on it and we want it to come back to us. So we do have an understanding of the questions that you raised and Doug raised.
Do we want it to come back to us if it's over 60,000 or put some number on it that maybe they can get it done for on a contingency?
I assuming that if they're coming back to us, they've run through their contingency. Because that contingency was included in the original $2 million approved.
So Jack, if we do this, is it going to be something that we take up at our RTM meeting next week or whenever it is, 2 weeks?
It's next week, but
Because
no,
that's my
because
only
it's not on
concern.
it's not on the agenda,
Right.
but what it's basically saying is we want things to come back to us. And then that's part of what we're, when I said this is going to be one of the
I'm with you. I don't disagree with that. I'm just concerned would this pause the project for some reason because it's not getting approved.
I spoke to Josh Kaufman. They found other ways to ensure that will be funded. Part of my concern on that part was the next Board of Finance meeting is May 19th.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're waiting to June for us to approve. But they say they have enough funds there to cover this, and then this will just replenish. So it's like they may be taking it out of one of the contingencies to cover this amount, and then when it comes back to us, they reimburse.
That is my
that
only
contingency.
concern with the stance we're taking here, because I would not want to see what is a kind of a policy motion that we should be forcing these things back to the RTM, hold up this particular project because we didn't have that policy in place.
I'm going to be a little bit more blunt.
Mm.
If they were so concerned about holding up the project, as I said, they could have easily done 150,000 on this in any of the March meetings of the Board of Selectmen, and then they could have passed it over to the Board of Finance, who would have approved that amount also, and we could have added it to the April or the May 13th agenda to approve it. So if there's a holdup, it's because of their inaction, not because of
No, I was thinking more in terms of your proposed changes to the ordinances that would force that to come back. Right.
It just means that you got to work on it timely.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion. But I mean, we could put a percentage of, like, let's say if it's 4% of the original project and at X amount of dollars, that it should come back. There's been two things that we,
I would prefer that, Jack. I would prefer you do that in your resolution.
no, I can't do it in the resolution. We'll do it when we address the ordinances.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the point I was making, Doug, is like, I understand why Jack's proposing this, but the real issue underlying this is we need to change the ordinance to create some of those guardrails so that there is no doubt that it has to come back. What they ended up doing here is using discretion because it isn't clear that they had to come back. And now Jack's sending a message that we should have it come back.
So are you making a motion? Because I'll second it.
Yes, I did make a motion. So I had Charles first, and I'll put Peter and Doug second. We'll have both of you. So yeah, but this is part of, as we're going through the district stuff,
Mhm.
this is some of the things that are coming up. So that, again, on HHR, the RTM should have a right to say, no, we don't agree with moving 915,000, adding to our debt and increasing our costs to the HHR project, that we can override the Board of Selectmen's, Board of Finance's decision. And we can do it at the budget if it's a budget issue.
Jack,
Yeah.
Jack, would that apply to the sort of infamous SSO runaround of us a couple of years ago, where contingency funds were used to fund the SSOs and bypass us? And if I'm correct, the people have been open about that bypass was intentional on a substantive basis, not on a financial basis.
I don't know. Well, first, I'm dealing with bonds and appropriations. That's the first thing I want, because my concern is, and this I've had discussions with other people in the RTM as well as on the Board of Finance. Contingencies in some of these building projects and other things are not a slush fund.
Right.
They're there for things within the scope of that project. And so one of the things I've spoken to John about is tightening up the charter for any of these projects. And, we're willing to work with John on it, but even on the thing that's coming on Great Island, if we're not satisfied with the charter for the Great Island Committee, we can revise that charter and make it as a condition of the RTM's approval of that. So those are some of the things that I'm starting to talk about, so that the checks and balances that are supposed to be within the RTM are within the RTM, and things of what we're approving within scope, and not that somebody else is saying, oh, we can now, especially with the concern that some people have with Reed Hildebrand, that the original project of giving access grows into something else as well. So because they have contingency, so I have an extra $1 million, let's say, I can spend. So that's what it will deal when we're dealing with the ordinances, because while the districts are meeting, I'd also like to hold a session of just F&B on some of the things that I'm working on and some of the things that you guys might want to see as well from a financial perspective. Now, it just may be a misunderstanding of what John said at the Board of Finance or didn't say, but I think reiterating our position of what we heard at the Rules Committee is an important thing to have him understand. So that's why I'm putting it here, that we're just strongly recommending. So are we ready to vote? All in favor of the resolution, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. And we're running a little bit late. I'll blame it on the fact that we also were explaining certain things to the Boy Scouts. But the reality is, we've actually done most of our budget work already. So the only things we'll be discussing are things that might have some additional discussion. And my goal is always to be about 10, 15 minutes after the Board of Finance approves their budget, we're ready to vote on it ourselves. So we accomplished that this year. That was because of the good job done by the three boards and the work that we did in following. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting. I have Peter D. and I have Bill Dunn. And I don't know why anybody would want to stay here any longer, so I'm assuming that we can all raise our hand and say we're done. Thank you all very much for participating.